Good evening. Please forgive my background clutter. Generally, I use a filter so you don't have to deal with the clutter behind me. I want to touch on a little bit about the two manifestos. And I'm not going to go into the two manifestos of the two political parties on finance. I know precious little about finance. I'm not going to go into agriculture, even though I touched a little bit on agriculture when I was high school, agricultural science. I don't know enough about the subject to talk about the subject. I'm not going to talk about tourism. I don't know anything about tourism. I know precious little. So I'm going to talk about what I know about, and that's security. I'm going to talk about what I know. Now, I could talk a little bit about business, but I'm not going to do that. So here, I was looking at two manifestos, and I noticed that in full disclosure, I don't have the time. I'm gonna be honest with you. I really don't have the time to read through the manifestos. It would be too exhausting for me and time consuming, and I'm really a busy person. But I wanted to touch on a little bit about the first. Let's look at the JLP manifesto. Um, the JLP's manifesto came out later. I think they were probably working on it and adding some tech aspects to it. That's why it came out last Sunday, if my memory serves me correctly. And then, so I spent some time going through the PNP's manifesto on. I was looking for the integral thing, which is security. And those of you who follow me on another platform, you will recall that I spoke to you about how important security is to any country. And sometimes I may sound like a broken record, but it's because it's important for any country to have good security, good law enforcement. And one of the things I thought was when I was serving as a former member of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, one of the things that I thought was very important at the time was to increase response time to the public. It was one of the things that was, had I stayed and had I accelerated up the ranks, I would have, uh, wherever I had command, I would have put in place response time, even if it was not established on a national scale in the JCF, if I was a commanding officer. Um, when I got to that stage, that's something I would have initiated as part of my leadership program, getting response time up. Um, but that didn't happen. I left, so I'm not going to speak about that. But the critical issue of policing um, cannot be overemphasized, cannot be overstated, because in order to grow an economy, in order to build an economy must be built on the rule of law. And there are several ways you could go about that. Um, you could go about it in an autocratic way, or you could go about it in a democratic way. Now, those of us out here in the Western world, and for the most of the world tend to want to use a democratic way of going about things. And, you know, it, the democracy has its own meaning depending on where you are. Some places are more democratic than others, and I think that in all fairness to Jamaica, Jamaica is one of the more democratic places um, when it comes to governance. We have democratic governance, and I think that's something we should be proud of as electioneers. That we don't have anyone trying to disrupt our elections. We don't have not in any significant way. We don't have anyone trying to overthrow our government. And we have a high tolerance for people of all races and colors. And that's something that we as Jamaicans should be really, really proud of. No matter where it is that we are, we should be very proud of our budding democracy. and how great it has been and how inspiring it is to the rest of the world. Having said that, we cannot build a democratic nation unless we first establish the rule of law. And so the primacy of the rule of law cannot be overemphasized, it cannot be overstated. And those of you who follow me on TikTok or follow me on Facebook know I speak out against the People's National Party primarily on that basis, that the party does not respect the rule of law. They claim to respect the rule of law, but they don't. What they care about is power. And you may ask, why do I keep beating on the PNP? Because it's true. The national security spokesperson for the PNP came out with against the backdrop of a 40%, 40 plus percentage drop in violent in homicides, came out and said they want to change the approach of the police because the police is an occupying force. Jamaica is a small country. The police is not an occupying force. But the police, because of the seriousness of the crime situation in our country, the police and the military have to conjoin in order to have a strong presence as a deterrent effect. But the PNP does not want that because they lack the understanding and because they are associated with criminal gangs, that they do not want the police presence in some of the underserved communities that has helped towards the downward trajectory in homicides in particular. It is unconscionable. It is disqualifying, in my humble opinion, that any political party vying for national power would come out and say that they do not want the police to be militaristic against the background of the gangs that are operating and the brutality of those gangs and the lethality of those gangs operating in our country. Jamaicans like to talk about Singapore, and they like to talk about how Singapore adopted our model. What Jamaicans don't like to talk about is the fact that the Singaporean model comes at a high cost to the rights of their citizens. And Jamaicans love to talk about their rights, but Jamaicans largely do not have an appreciation that with rights comes responsibility. Excuse me for a sec. Sorry. I had to go grab my water. Yeah. With those rights comes responsibility. A lot of responsibilities as citizens. And as citizens, one of our major rights is that we must respect the rule of law. We must respect the laws so the laws can protect all of us. The PNP has for decades objected to and stood in the way of strong legislation that would curtail the burgeoning and escalating high crime rate in our country. And how have they gotten away with it? Well, for one, Jamaica has a very high tolerance for criminality. You know, my grandmother always said she not put her motor gun on talk, so I'm not putting my motor gun on talk. The Jamaican people have a very high tolerance for criminality, and so they have to be made to obey the laws. Jamaican people obey laws when they go overseas, by and large, but if they can get away with breaking laws, they break the law. A lot of Jamaicans, not all, but a lot of us will break laws. That's just a fact. Lots of us do. And even more of us are willing, if we wish to speak the truth, to cut people some slack who break the laws. Because there's always some kind of justification for breaking the laws. There's always some kind of reason for breaking laws. There's some kind of excuse. some kind of logic for breaking laws. We always have that logic. And nobody wants, and so there's precious little in the way of accountability. Poverty is used when Jamaicans' standard of living is exponentially higher than many countries in the world. Yeah. But because we don't want to take responsibility when we have a high tolerance rate, the PNP has been able to get away with standing in the way of legislation. And in addition to that, what the PNP has done, the PNP has used the cudgel of civil rights. Civil rights as a cudgel. Oh, we don't want to breach people's civil rights. And that statement is predicated on the premise that it is a binary choice for law enforcement to respect citizens' civil rights and enforce the laws, when it is exponentially false. It's not a binary choice. It's not either or. Both can be done and must be done. And as a former law enforcement officer, that's something I stand for and write against. Police abuse. It must be done. Respecting the law and respecting the right, citizens respecting the law and the police respecting the rights of citizens. It is actually two things that walk hand in hand, because the whole idea of policing is a compromise of sorts, yeah, between the governed and the governors, so to speak, the protected and the protectors. So that has to go hand in hand, where the people work hand in hand with the people they employ to look after their interests, their security interests. And that expands to other areas of the economy, whether it's the fire service, the medical service, any service. It is what it is. Citizens employ those professionals, the teaching profession, whatever, to serve their interests. And so those public servants must serve the interests of the public. There's no way around that. So the choice is not binary. It's not a choice. Both must be done. The citizens must respect and obey the laws, and the police must respect, in carrying out their duties, must respect the rights of citizens. And so the citizens must not get in the way of the police performing their duties, which is a critical component that has to be addressed when we talk about the laws. Yeah? We can't have citizens getting in the way of the police. But somehow this has missed the People's National Party for decades. And I keep hammering this point, and I'm going to keep talking about this point regardless of what happened on September 3rd. Because the People's National Party does not respect the rule of law. And I think they continue to sell the whole notion of respecting people's civil rights to the majority of the people who grab onto it, not understanding that what that does is that it builds a justice system that is looking out for the rights of the wrong people, the criminals, when the laws should be there for the protection of everybody, but more so the protection of those people who are law-abiding citizens. Goes without saying. What I'm saying to you from a national security perspective, these are just plain facts. So one of the things I went to look at in the PNP's manifesto to see what was their position on crime. What was their position? Because their spokesperson came out and attended some conference, and he made some statements that were absolutely shocking. Now, Peter Bunting, first of all, has absolutely no credibility on national security. Peter Bunting, and I'm going to be very, very respectful to the office that Peter Bunting once held, the National Security Office. Yeah? The Ministry of National Security of which I was an employee many years ago. I'm going to be respectful. But Peter Bunting has been nothing but a jackass as a Minister of National Security. He had no understanding of the role he was placed in as leader. And when his failures, his incompetence, and the People's National Party's policies of mollycoddling criminals came to a head under Bunting's leadership and Portia Simpson Miller and P.J. Patterson before, when it came to a head, because all the PNP has been the same, whether it was KD Knight or whoever, it has been the same. Lack of leadership. But there could be no leadership at the Ministry of National Security level because the policy and the ideological perspective and belief of the People's National Party is that the police should not be a factor when it comes to enforcing our laws. The criminals should be able to do whatever they feel. But that happens because in a lot of cases, the PNP people who are actually signing off on laws, voting on the type of laws we have, were criminal defense lawyers. A blatant conflict of interest, if you ask me. You go back to KD Knight. KD Knight was Minister of National Security and a defense attorney at the same time. A lot of their lawyer members in the People's National Party are criminal defense lawyers. That's why we cannot get sound policy from the PNP. There's no credible, and again, they're gang affiliations. The gangs affiliated with them that they don't want to see put away. So they cannot support strong and credible law enforcement. So as I said, I decided to look in their manifesto. And in their manifesto, I kept scrolling. Page 1, nothing. Page 2, nothing. Nothing on security, which is the fundamental cornerstone of any country. The nation's security must be paramount. Must be paramount. There was nothing on page 3, not on page 4, not on page 10, not on page 20, not on page 30, not on page 35, not on page 40, not on page 45, not on page 47. It was on page 48 that they mentioned policing for community trust. And let me read it to you. We will transform policing into a model that prioritizes protection and service rather than occupation. So this is a blatant slap into the face of those members who are going to run out and running behind and giving protection for these PNP members. They see you as occupiers. And what you're doing out on the street, they see you as an occupation force in the garrisons where they want the crime to flourish, because that's how they get votes. And it went on to say they want to expand intelligence-led and problem-oriented police focused on hotspots and high-risk individuals. The problem is that now most of those hotspots are gone, and that this model that the Angehonis administration is executing, improved training in human rights, de-escalation, and trauma-informed care. So we want to make sure we improve human rights for the police against the gangsters with the M16 rifles and the AK-47s. That's what the PNP wants to do. Talk them, de-escalate, talk them out of it, talk them out of handing over their weapons when they're shooting at the police. De-escalate. Yeah? Don't terminate them with high-power weapons. Talk them down. Don't hurt them. They're valuable. Because, the society can turn them around like how they turn around Isaac Buchanan a two-time drug dealer. Yeah. Promote mental health services and care development for law enforcement officers. Yeah, most of them gonna get mad, so that's gonna be needed. Most of them gonna get mad because they can't do their jobs. Build stronger relationship between police and the communities they serve. The same old recycled jargon. The same old recycled nonsense. And page 48 of their manifesto. When are the Jamaican voters going to wise up and recognize that the People's National Party does not serve the interests of Jamaica? And let me tell you something. I kind of like speed read through some pages because I'm really not interested in what they have to say because I know it's all garbage. I'm gonna be very frank. I speed read through most of the pages, and it's a bunch of promises. They're gonna just give money away and do. Everybody gonna be happy. So we could change the name of Jamaica from Jamaica to Utopia. Yeah, it's gonna be a utopian concept. We're gonna change the name to Utopia. Yeah. No means of paying for it. No way to pay for the giveaways in the new nation of Utopia. Remember we said Jamaica name will change on that PNP to Utopia. Because everything's going to be for free. Everything's going to be for free. But it's built on monopoly money. And those of you who know what monopoly is, yeah, it's plain money. Because over the last decade or so, Jamaica's growth rate, the economy has grown less than 1%. And is projected to grow just over 1% for the next year, if my memory of the numbers are correct. It's time to be corrected on that. So the finance minister has come out and said that based on the promises that the PNP is making, the economy would have to grow somewhere between 8 and 10% in order for any of those things to really happen. So once again, the People's National Party is promising the Jamaican people a pipe dream. A pipe dream built on nothing solid. They're building houses on sand. They're creating a monopoly kingdom that when it falls over. They're telling you, because a lot of us out here in the commentary, in the commentarette, people who ask questions, important questions. How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? So they're forced to now say, oh, we're going to pay for it. It's in the budget. Because remember, when we get elected, we're not going to continue the Labour Party's policies because we got elected to enact our policies. So we're going to carry out our policies. So we will decide where to cut, what to splice, what to continue to this. What will this continue? Now you tell me what the Labour Party have that's going so well for the country that should be discontinued. They're saying that when they get elected, they're going to discontinue every damn thing because they get elected to enact their own programs. And to a certain extent, I agree with them. So the good things that are happening right now in the economy are going to come to an end. And since national security is not a priority, which is the subject I'm really into today, since national security is not a priority, they will not prioritize security. Not only will they not put the resources into security, they're going to ask the police to go back and sit their backsides in the barracks and not do anything, not go after the criminal gangs, because they want the criminal gangs, again, to metastasize like cancer. That's what the PNP wants to go back to. You don't have to take it from me, but it is what it is. And so, as I said, across the board, across the country, crime went down 40+%. But that's the national average. In some neighborhoods, in some police divisions, crime went down as much as 70%. So for every 100 persons who would have been unalived in one of those so-called hotspots that existed before, for every 100 persons who would have been unalived, only 30, unfortunately. Fortunately, sorry, only 30, fortunately, would lose their lives. And I initially said unfortunately because I was already ahead of myself. Because I wanted to say that even 30 human beings losing their lives is in any area at all, even if 30 Jamaicans were losing their lives to violence across the entire country for an entire year, it would be, in my estimation, a 5-alarm fire. Because I don't think anybody should lose their lives to criminals. But my reality is different than most people's reality. And that's why I became a law enforcement officer at the age I did. Because I believed in human justice and I believe in human rights. But I also believed that the most fundamental right any person has was the right to life. I was never concerned more about the rights of the people who would unalive somebody. I've always been concerned about the rights of the people who are the victims and the families they leave behind. That's where my interest has always been. Sadly, that is not so for the People's National Party. To hell with the victims and their families for the People's National Party. Let's save the killers and rehabilitate them because we need them in our party. If ever there was a backward and retarded way of going about running a government, that is it. If ever there was a sick and cynical way about governing, if ever there was a political party that is undeserving of trust, if ever there was a political party that is undeserving of power, it is the People's National Party. They should never be entrusted with power. That's my final word on the People's National Party. I'm just going to skedoodle over to the Jamaica Labour Party's manifesto. And I found this nice little toy. And the Labour Party's manifesto, of course, it's an interactive AI tool, Bella. And I want to ask Bella a couple of questions on what the Jamaica Labour Party intends to do going forward. So let's see. See if I can get it to work. Bella, what does the Jamaica Labour Party intend to do about crime in Jamaica? Bella, are you there? Let me see if did I get logged out? No. All right, Bella.
I'm Bella. I'm here to help you with any questions you have about the Jamaica Labour Party, whether it's our achievements, manifesto candidates, or anything else you'd like to know.
Bella, tell us, what does the Jamaica Labour Party intend to do going forward, in addition to what it has already done on national security?
We are committed to building on our strong foundation in national security. Going forward, we will continue our efforts to dismantle criminal organizations, strengthen our intelligence capacity, and stop the flow of illegal guns. We also plan to fully digitize and automate processes within the Jamaica Constabulary Force and expand our cyber defense capabilities. Furthermore, we will implement new technology in our immigration systems to enhance border security and intensify rehabilitation programs for inmates, including providing additional psychological and psychiatric support and vocational training. We will also strengthen our national security legislative framework and expand training opportunities through the Jamaica National Service Corps. Finally, we will scale up community intervention programs to reach all 100 of Jamaica's most vulnerable communities with targeted anti-violence strategies. Is there anything else I can assist you with related to the Jamaica Labour Party's work?
Yes, for sure. What does the Jamaica Labour Party intend to do about the Customs Department and the Corrections Department?
We are committed to enhancing both the Customs Department and the Corrections Department. For the Corrections Department, we will intensify rehabilitation efforts for inmates, supported by a modernized and strengthened probation service. We will also provide additional psychological and psychiatric support, social workers, and advanced remedial education and vocational training.
Okay, so Bella has logged me out, says my conversational, I've exceeded the conversational limit, so to speak. Well, in reality, it is only true because I've had the system running for probably well over an hour. So it's not that there is a bug in the system. It has been my fault because I've had Bella logged in now for quite some time. So it's my fault. But as you can see, you hear for yourself. You've heard for yourself. This is the difference between the two political parties now. And for those of you who have followed me for years and read my blogs, mikebeckles.com, you can still go to that website and look at some of the policy proposals that I've made on security over the years, many, many, many years. And it is really heartening for me. I'm buoyed by the fact that I've seen so many of the initiatives that I've proposed now being inculcated and included in the security apparatus, in the law enforcement and national security apparatus for our country. Exponentially. We need to see an exponential increase in that. One of the things I'm buoyed by is the increased penalties for violent offenders for gun crimes, possession of guns and ammunition and gun crimes. And finally, a word to everybody. For the people who believe that there's any other thing that has seen this drop in violence and in the unaliving of our fellow Jamaicans, it has been nothing but the penalties that have been increased, and for the possession of firearms and for the unaliving of our fellow Jamaicans. That is it. The idea of going to prison for 10 and 15 years now, not no 1 year or 2 year sentence or admonish and discharge by the liberal University of the West Indies judges and turning them back on the street has been one of the biggest factors. Those are some of the biggest factors that that has hated the increase and the growth of violence in our country. Lenient sentences, 3, 4, 5 years. Somebody who is convicted on homicide is back on this in the streets, being on the streets for bail after committing a homicide, going back in, going back out, doing the same thing up to 5 times, out on bail. How in God's name can a system operate that way? Where unelected bureaucrats, these little judges, so-called judges, most of them PMP ideologues, turning violent criminals back on the street. Most times they're back on the streets before the police officers could walk out of the investigating officer can walk out of court. Those violent thugs are back on the street drinking and laughing and celebrating and going back to what got them locked up in the first place, doing the same things. Drinking and laughing that they kill and collect and drink and forget. These are things that the People's National Party don't care about. And so we have to give the Andrew Holness administration credit for all these things. Because a lot of the people who are talking about time come don't understand that some of them would have been gone had the PMP been in power. Many of them would have been unalived and gone. But thanks to the vision, or at the very least, the ability of Andrew Holness and some of the people around him to listen to outside voices like this one saying, this cannot be the way forward for our country. Because none of the things that you're saying and doing are not, those things are not working. Those things are not enhancing the security of the country. There has to be consequences for the people who decide that they're not going to abide by any law. There must be consequences for people who decide that the rules set by society does not apply to them. Those antisocial behavior must be removed from the equation one way or the other. And even though I believe the Jamaica Labour Party, when they came into power, since they've been in power 9 years now, they pussyfooted around this issue. And many of us, including myself, have lashed out against the Jamaica Labour Party because I didn't think that they came with the seriousness that that was required on this issue of national security. When you have a party like the PNP using the term human rights as a cudgel and constantly telling low information people and illiterate people about they're trying to deprive you of your human right and civil rights. They believe it because they don't know no better. They believe it. And that encourages them to get up into the face of police officers and force police officers now to take action against them. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Getting involved in police officers making lawful arrests. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. How dare you get up in a police officer's face when he's making an arrest that has nothing to do with you? These are the kind of things that the PMP socialize the average Jamaicans to believe, the average Jamaican to believe. That they have a duty to involve themselves in police work. Get involved in the activities of police officers when they're effectuating arrests. And so to all these, my final thing is to all these police officers who are serving now, go ahead and vote for the promises of the PNP. But while you're going ahead and voting for them, remember the 8 years of wage freeze in which you had nobody to go to. You had to work with frozen wages and escalating prices of everything. Cost of living was high and your wages was low, and many of you were pushed into poverty. Many had to run away because you couldn't survive on the salary. Go ahead and vote for them. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the deep dive. You know, here we call it like we see it. Not everybody, this program is not going to be for everybody. But if you like truth, you're free to come. You're free to join. And you can always drop me a comment in the section below, in the comment section below. Because you know what? I keep it real. I keep it real. So here's the deal. Drop me a comment, share the video, leave me a like if you like it, leave me a dislike if you don't like it, because this is politics. We're talking politics. Not everybody's going to agree with us, and neither is everybody going to disagree with us. But we welcome everybody as long as you're respectful. You don't have to remove anybody's comments. I personally respond to every comment that I can. Even some that I would remove, I let them remain. Sometimes some of the comments are so disrespectful that I won't bother to respond because I see that there's no intellectual reason to respond to that person, because it'll be like throwing pearls to swine. But for people who are worthy, the other people who have alternate points of view, respect those points of view, even though I may respectfully disagree. Thank you so much, and you have a good night.